What are the things you wish school had taught you about understanding yourself, life, relationships and health, so that each day you could develop to become the person you know you could be? Unlock your potential and live the life that you want.
Well, luckily for you, you don't need to go back to school because Mum and daughter Jane and Liv are coming to the rescue. We welcome you to the School Run podcast, where every day is a school day and we open your world to the things that school didn't teach you. Are you ready to become the best version of you?
Hello and welcome to another episode of the School Run podcast. I am Liv and I am here with my mum and co-host
Jane James.
Now, first I want to say to my grandma, who's definitely listening right now because she's one of our first listeners every Monday morning, that she has been waiting for this episode for a whole year. Like, we've not heard the end of how much she'd wanted this guest on the podcast, so no pressure. But for anyone who hasn't listened before and is a bit confused what I'm talking about, last year in 2024, I had 3 knee surgeries. My first one was at the end of January and my last one was in October. And today we are joined by the legend that did all 3 surgeries. And now I have 2 fully functioning knees.
Which is amazing. We are really privileged to have this guest, and we've got 13,000 listeners every week, tuning in on Spotify and Apple, listening to the School Run journey, helping young people to figure out that you don't have to have it all figured out at school. Life is a journey, and you can get lots of wisdom to become the best version of yourself from lots of people in life. And we are really privileged to have done over 100 episodes now every single Monday. We are joined by Bilal Barkatali, and Bilal is a consultant specialist knee surgeon. Liv describes him as the legend, and obviously she has a very personal experience of that. But thank you for joining us, Bilal. And what do we need to know about you that led you to become a knee surgeon?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. And thank you for such a great introduction. So great to see you both. It was a real pleasure seeing you in clinic over the last year and being able to help you with your knees. And I know we discussed doing this podcast, and I'm really pleased that we're finally able to do it. So thanks for having me. Okay, so where do you want to start? How should we start?
I suppose at school, was always becoming a knee surgeon your goal and aspiration, or did something personally happen for you to want to go into this profession? I suppose, where was the inspiration for it?
Okay, well, should we start from the beginning then, from my school years, which is quite a long time ago. So I grew up in Manchester, in a small place called Little Hulton, actually, which is between Bolton and Salford. And I went to primary school at St Andrew's Primary School. And just so happens in the last few months, I've been in touch with one of my primary school teachers. She's in her 80s now, and we reconnected just about 5 years ago or so, just via email. And actually, my inspiration to do stuff in my life goes probably back to my primary school years, because Mrs. Yates, this was one of my teachers in the later years of primary school, and she really helped me by encouraging me to sit the exams for my secondary school, which was Bolton School, right? So I did the entrance exam based on her encouragement. And I passed the exam, and I attended Bolton School for my secondary education from all the way up to GCSE, then A-levels, and then on to university. And I went to university to study medicine in Edinburgh, right? So, and then obviously that was a long time ago. So I started secondary school in 1991. And I left in 1998. And now when you say it out loud, that was quite a long time ago.
It was the noughties, wasn't it? It was the 90s and the noughties.
And so late 90s when I went to university and to study medicine. And at that time, around 16 to 18 is when you decide in your life which subjects you want to study for A-level and which direction your life is going to take. And even from the very beginning, from like 11, 12, I guess my aptitude was more towards maths and sciences. And so that naturally lends itself to wanting to do something scientifically based like medicine. although there's a lot more to medicine than just science, there's a large human component to it as well. And so it's a caring profession. So you have to have that side of it in you as well to want to be able to do it, because actually at the end of the day, you're looking after human beings and their needs. And so to be able to understand other people and what they need and what they're looking for, having those qualities makes it easier to be able to do this job well. Now, at that time, I guess I didn't really know, and people don't know. I didn't know for sure whether it was the right decision to do that. My grades were good. You need good grades to get into medical school, and my grades were good throughout. And so I didn't really know. We had, I remember in, I think it was must be around GCSE. We did. There was a careers fair, and there was a careers advisor, and we filled out a questionnaire on the old BBC computers. It was, I think, like a personality test or something with 100 questions, and you fill the answer all the questions, then it gives you like a list of things that might be suitable for you and your attributes. And one of them was the doctor was on there, as well as lots of other things. And so my decision making around choosing to do medicine was around my grades, which were good, and then I didn't really know what else that I could do that I'd be good at doing. And so, to challenge myself to be able to do something as difficult as medicine at medical school was the main reason for doing it. And when you're at the age of 18, medicine is such a huge field, and knee surgery is one really small part of it. And so starting from a really, really broad base and ending up as a knee surgeon has been quite a long journey, actually. And it wasn't something a lot of people, you speak to some people, they're like, oh, I've been wanting to do this ever since I was 5. But I'm not really like that. So my life has taken its course through decisions that have been made along the way. And it's just, like, it's like a decision tree. So you make a decision, you go this way, then you go that way, and so this is where I've ended up.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I do think that from what I see from with the untrained medical knowledge, is that usually people are an orthopedic surgeon and they sort of do a broad range of things within orthopedics, knees, hips, maybe, I don't know, connected. But yours was very specifically, you've gone really down the knee element where you are a knee specialist. Is that common? Do doctors become just knee specialists, or have you really taken it to another level? Because I know that you speak around the world and you're involved in lots of things. Is it more unique, the route that you've ended up with?
Yeah, so in the past, so like in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you trained to do orthopedic surgery, and it was more of a generalist surgical field. But as time has gone on and different problems, different pathologies have been identified, it's absolutely impossible to do the full broad range of orthopedic surgery, which includes shoulder, elbow, hand, wrist, hip, knee, foot and ankle, spine. And in that era, people did do the full breadth of surgery, but actually, to be a real specialist and to be really good at a specific specialist area, you have to really focus on it and repeat and train. And that's the only way that you can get really good results time after time after time, because surgery is a practice, it's a science, it's surgery, but it's also an art. And it's also a practical skill, which has to be practiced and repeated to make sure that your results are where you want them to be. So every single patient that I see, I want them to have an excellent result every single time. And occasionally that doesn't happen because nothing is perfect. And when that happens, that's not a good outcome for me or for that patient or for any other surgeon. If you do surgery that doesn't have a completely optimal outcome, you always ask yourself, why has that not happened, and how could that be better for somebody else? And so over the decades and over that period of time, we've realized as a medical community and as a surgical community that being a specialist in a field is better than being a generalist that does a little bit of everything and not enough of everything to be able to get really good at it. So over the last, I guess, 10 to 15 years, more specialist areas have been developed, and the knee is one of them. The knee is obviously my favorite. Otherwise, I would have done something else. The knee is really complicated, and it has like a broad range of problems that can present from, young patients with instability or older patients with degenerative conditions. And then there's lots of minutiae within that. So it's really interesting and really complicated and challenging. And so that's how I kind of gravitated towards it myself. And when I was, one of the big reasons actually is when I was 20 years old at university, I played a lot of sport growing up. I played a lot of rugby at school. I played for the first team for 2 years in my final 2 years. And then I played football at medical school for the medical school for that team. And I've always been quite physically active and I love playing sport. And when I was 20 at university, whilst playing football, I ruptured one of the ligaments in my knee, my ACL. And little did I know at the time that that would be one quite critical factor which has led me down this particular road. So if I'd never had that injury, then maybe I wouldn't have decided to choose orthopedic surgery. And maybe then I wouldn't have become a knee surgeon. So when I see patients now who have the same injury that I did, I know exactly what they're going through because when I injured my knee for quite a long time, for about 9 months, kept being misdiagnosed. So I had my injury, my knee was in a bad way. And then, with any injury, things settle down, don't they? So the inflammation settles, the swelling settles, it gets a bit better. And so it starts to feel okay. And so, like, there was like a 6 week cycle. I'd go back to try to play football and I couldn't because my knee would give way almost immediately. And then it would swell up. And then I'd go back to A&E. Then I'd be told, oh, just rest it or do this or do that. And then, so this cycle went on for quite a long time. And so for about 9 months, I wasn't able to really do anything because I would keep trying, but I wasn't able to do it. And then eventually I just marched straight to the orthopedic department as a medical student in Edinburgh. And the old Royal Infirmary, which was the medical school hospital, it was in the middle of the city at that time and it was attached to the medical school. So I just walked across and just went straight to the orthopedic department and saw this great surgeon. And he's an inspirational character. Again, another, inspirational person in my life is Professor John Keating. I think he's almost retired now. He's an Edinburgh knee surgeon. And I didn't have an appointment or anything. I just went to his orthopedic clinic and he just happened to be there. And I told him, listen, I'm really sorry. I'm a medical student and this has been happening to my knee. And he just sat me down, had one quick look at it. And then he was like, oh, you ruptured your ACL. You need an operation. And I was like, oh, okay, when can you do it? And he did it within 6 weeks, really quickly. And then that got me started on my road to recovery. And then I was able to get back to playing sport and my knee's stable. And I'm really grateful for the work that he did. And so that's inspired me to help other people who, have been through a similar situation that I went through.
It's fabulous, isn't it? It's lovely to know the story and see how the journey unfolds. I remember when we first met with you and you were asking Olivia about her A-levels. And I think, a really lovely piece of advice or wisdom that you shared was, you've got to work for a very long period of time. So you need to be happy in that work and choose something that you really love. But it's also got to pay for your family and living, and life's expensive. And finding that passion and purpose. We talk about it a lot on the podcast, something called ikigai. It's a Japanese word where you do something that you love. It's purposeful. The world needs it. You get paid for it. And you obviously have that in abundance in the role you have, and I do in my role. And I hope that Liv goes on to have that. But it was wonderful advice that you gave her. What have been the biggest? Have you?
I have a question.
Oh, sorry. I knew you would do. I can see her laughing.
My question is, when your first ever surgery that you did, like, how were you nervous? What was it? And like, how did you feel after you'd completed it?
Right. Okay. So surgical training is a very long road, right? So there's obviously medical school, which is 5 or 6 years. So I started in 1998. I finished in 2004. And then when medical school finishes, you have to do some time as a junior doctor because obviously the knowledge and skills you've learned in medical school, they're mostly theoretical with some practical component, but really you're not a doctor at that stage. You have to learn to become a doctor. And so that process starts straight after medical school and is usually in my time in 2004 is 1 year as a junior doctor. and then you become that was a junior house officer, then you do some time as a senior house officer, and that's just basically spending a lot of time in the hospital looking after the people on the wards, and then you do like a rotational program. So for the first 6 months, I did 6 months of medicine. So that's, medicine is a medical side of medicine, and there's a surgical side of medicine. There's other things like psychiatry or intensive care or anesthesia. So it's got lots of different facets to it. So medicine is like internal medicine, so things like respiratory system, cardiology, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I was a junior member of a team on the ward looking after those patients, and it was good work. I enjoyed doing it, but I knew that's not what I wanted to do. Then I did 6 months of surgery as a junior doctor on the surgical ward, and that led me a bit more towards surgery. Then I did 6 months as an A&E doctor in Stirling, and that was a great experience. I absolutely loved working in A&E because you're seeing anything that can go wrong with a person. People come to A&E, so that's a gateway into the hospital, right? So at that stage, that's where I learned how to do like basic suturing and stitching and cleaning wounds and looking after wounds. And there's a lot of like practical surgical basic stuff you can do in the A&E department, and I was good at it. I really enjoyed doing it. Like people with dislocated shoulders or dislocated patellas or ankles, reducing those, putting them in plasters, suturing up wounds, that kind of stuff. And so that led me to want to do surgery. And then I I did some anatomical teaching at Oxford University for 6 months after that. And that was a brilliant job because teaching surgery is all about anatomy. You have to learn about the human body and know the human anatomy really well in order to be able to manipulate it with surgery, right? So that 6 month period was one of the foundational kind of stepping stones for me to become a surgeon. And so that was in Oxford. And then in those days, this is 2005, 6, you had to individually apply to different hospitals to go and work there and join a surgical training rotation as a junior doctor. And I ended up getting a basic surgical training rotation at Salford Royal Hospital. From all the different applications that I did around the country, just ended up getting one totally by luck back in Manchester at Salford Royal, not far from where I'd grown up and been to school. So again, another, coincidence in life. So when I started that rotation is when I did my first actual operation, right? So that operation was taught to me by a hand surgeon called Lindsay Muir, and he just retired last year from Salford Royal. And I remember that very clearly. So when you're learning to do surgery, so this is a hand operation, right? So carpal tunnel syndrome is something that affects people's hands, where one of the main nerves that goes through the carpal tunnel in the wrist that supplies these three fingers, that nerve starts to feel compressed within the wrist here, and the surgery is called a carpal tunnel decompression, where you make an incision and you release that pressure within that tunnel, and that gives the nerve space to breathe and the nerve function recovers. So there are, it's not it's not a huge operation. It takes, anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes, but there are complications that can happen. And I remember that's the first time I'd picked up a knife to do an operation, and Mr. Muir was amazing. He's taught lots of people. And obviously, you have to do your homework. You have to know your anatomy. You have to know the operation. People just don't let you start practicing on other human beings without having that baseline knowledge. And so I did all of that, and he tested me on it before I was allowed to do the surgery. So before he went in, he asked me all the different questions about how I was going to do the operation, how I would prepare the patient, what the steps were of the operation. And he allowed me to do it. And so that was the first time I'd seen that operation, by the way. So I'd assisted him first, and I'd watched him do it, and he talked me through it. And then after I'd done that a few times and I was able to know exactly what the steps were, he then allowed me to do a full operation. And I remember that, and that was about 2006. And it was amazing. Like being able to do it was very exciting, totally exhilarating. And it was just, it was a brilliant moment.
What a success, and what a feeling to have gone through those steps, but also to have an amazing teacher in that process. And I guess that changes for different people going through the surgical training. Not guaranteed the most amazing teacher always, but you had one, and and got such fantastic results out of the first surgery?
Yeah, so I think not just in surgical training or learning of any sort, I think the experience you have with your teachers, the people who provide the wisdom to you, that experience can vary wildly. And I've come across other surgical teachers who weren't as patient or as good. And so you learn a lot from some people, you don't learn very much from others, but with every interaction you have, there's something to take away from it, right? So that's one thing that was taught to me, and I would always teach that to other people. So when you have a great teacher, you can take a lot of wisdom and knowledge about life and about whatever you're training in, and that's great. And then sometimes you'll have people that aren't so good at teaching, and your experience or relationship might not be very good with them. But what can you learn from that situation? You can analyze the situation, and you can learn from that. Why has this situation occurred? Why is your relationship with this person not so good? What are the things that they're not doing that they could be doing better? And then you can take those lessons and take them on board for yourself, so you don't repeat that when you're in the position to teach somebody else. So even if so you can take a negative situation and you can still take something positive from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever taught, like you said, when you did your first surgery with your mentor, have you ever been that person for someone else and showed them how to do a surgery and then let them carry it out by themselves?
Yes, so yeah, I have. So after all the training and everything, I started as a consultant orthopedic knee surgeon at Salford Royal in 2014, right? So my initial contact as a junior doctor at Salford was in 2006, where I did some of my basic training. And then once you finish your basic training, you have to then apply for higher surgical training, which is a 6-year training program.
Wow.
And again, that's national as well, right? So you apply nationally, and again, I ended up getting my specialist training rotation in the Northwest. And so, so that's a 6-year program, and the blocks are 6-month training blocks. And so sometimes you're at the hospital for 6 months, sometimes you're there for 12 months, sometimes a bit longer. And so I rotated around the Northwest. So I worked at Salford, Bolton, Blackburn, Trafford, um, Wrightington and Wigan. So there's a lot of places around Oldham. I've worked at Oldham Hospital in my training as well. So that was a 6-year training program, and then the end of which you then have to apply again to become a consultant somewhere, and you have to prove that you're ready to start doing the surgery. And so that happened for me in 2014, and I started as a consultant in August of 2014, which is over 10 years ago now, and everything goes so quickly. And soon after starting as a consultant at Salford, I was then assigned a trainee from the local deanery. And so I've trained a few people along the way. And the one person I'd say that sticks in memory is so you're assigned individuals for a short period, like 6 months, and sometimes you're assigned a person for their full 6-year training program as their assigned educational supervisor. So he's a good friend of mine now. He's just become a consultant after finishing his training. He's called Tom Collins, and he came to work with me, I think in 2015, I think, and he spent 6 months with me and a year in the department, and I was also his assigned educational supervisor. And so when he was working with me, I taught him how to go through the steps of doing a knee replacement and knee arthroscopy and all that kind of stuff. And actually, when you're doing it from the other side, when you're training somebody else, because the risks are so high in surgery, you have to get it right for every patient that you're doing it for. Allowing somebody else to do an operation is quite nerve-wracking, right? Because I know how to do it because I've trained for a long time to do it. And even if you do know how to do it and you've trained for a long time, things don't always go as you want them to go because it's surgery, right? It's not entirely predictable. And then having to explain to somebody else and allowing them to pick up the knife and do the actual surgery can be very nerve-wracking, actually. But thankfully, Tom was really good, and so he didn't cause any issues, and so we're all good.
That's really good, and it's fabulous that you're able to give back, but also see the success of that of your mentoring program, really.
Yeah, so I saw him just a few months ago, and he's finished his training, and we were just catching up over a beer, and it was honestly so fulfilling to see this young person grow and turn into like this brilliant surgeon, well qualified, confident, be able to go forth and do a great job. It was amazing.
Absolutely, it's fascinating. What have been the biggest challenges of being a consultant in these I know you talk about surgery doesn't always go to plan, things can go wrong, all of that, but what have been the major challenges for you that you've had to overcome?
Okay, so I think being able to do the surgery is a given, right? So if you're going to be a consultant doing whatever type of work that you're doing, whether it's knee or hip surgery or whether it's cardiology or whatever, the assumption is that you are competent to do the job that you're going to provide your patients. Okay, so that's a given, that's a baseline, and then beyond that, there are things that develop all of the time, new things, new techniques, and progress happens all of the time. So keeping up to date with that is very important. And I've always, I've done that, and I speak about, the latest techniques, etc. There are some of it, well, at least one of which that I've developed personally. And I love doing that. And so the surgical side of things has never been a big problem for me. I've had complications like every surgeon does, not that many, thankfully, touch wood. um, but when that happens, that can be quite heartbreaking and quite difficult to deal with, because despite your best efforts, things haven't gone very well. And so psychologically and, personally, that can be quite difficult to take because there's a human being at the end of it. And if somebody else is unhappy and you try to help them but not been able to, then, that causes some unhappiness in oneself as well. So that bit of it, although not very common, is quite challenging. And then there, there's another side to it. So I worked in the NHS all of my life. I left 12 months ago, and I never envisaged that I would do that. My plan was always to work in the NHS until retirement. And so the biggest challenge for me was becoming a consultant in 2014, and then realizing that actually, despite being the person that patients come and see, I have very little power in order to affect how patient care should be carried out for my own patients, right? So, yeah, having to negotiate with non-medical people, with hospital management, trying to explain things to them that they don't particularly care about or want to understand, or support your practice. And so these are all non-medical, non-surgical things that you don't learn when you're at medical school or training. You don't learn that you'd have to deal with hospital politics, for example, and other personalities, and how you go about ensuring that you can do your practice in how you want to do it. And so, for me, one of the most challenging things has been the non-surgical stuff.
Yeah, and I understand that. I really understand that. I think it's interesting. We had a bit of a situation with my husband and kidney stones last year, and I think so much comes down today to funding, and they're all talking about funding or whatever, and that's fine, and we don't need to go there in it. But ultimately, it's about care of people and human beings, and when the two, when they're dealing with one which is stats and data and funding and tick boxes, and actually we've got human beings here that need care in a certain way.
Yeah, I think I was very lucky, obviously, that I got to have this surgery done in a private hospital. But I know someone in my netball team that had very similar to me. She had also dislocated both her knees and was going through the NHS. And I was very grateful that I had my operation very quickly, and then I was able to be on the road to recovery. And now I'm obviously back to netball. But her operation took her from a first appointment, I think a year to actually get it done. So that whole year she had where she wasn't actually able to do anything, with the worry of her knees continuing to dislocate. And I think, like you said, at the end of the day, people are at the forefront of the medical profession because you want to help those people. And help them to get better and carry on living their lives the way you want to. And I can understand how it's hard when you maybe not able to do that in the way that you know is best to do that.
Hi everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode so far. We're just cutting in to say, if you're enjoying our podcast, please click the follow button on whichever platform you're listening on. And please leave us a review. We'd be so grateful for your support and feedback. Podcasts are free to listen to, but if you are loving our school-run chats and debates, please consider buying us a virtual coffee. The link will be in the description of every podcast episode, and it will also be in the bio of our Instagram, which is @theschoolrun_official. And why not give it a follow while you're there, so you can see all the updates and get sneak peeks at upcoming episodes. Thank you so much, and happy listening.
Despite having resigned and left from the NHS because of the issues that we've just talked about, I still think the NHS is probably one of the greatest things in the world, right? So I think the way I look at it is, what are we trying to achieve? And I think one of our main goals should be trying to create a better world, right? So how do you go about doing that? That's obviously very difficult because we're not doing very well at the moment, internationally speaking, about it, right? So education is a really, really big part of that, right? So education and nurturing young people, and realizing and trying to define what kind of things do we need to achieve to make a better society and better people, right? So better informed, better educated, healthier, people able to, make informed decisions about their own lives, make better political decisions when you go to the polling booth. Do you know why you're voting in the way that you're voting, or be able to, digest information and know that, is this information, especially in this day and age, it's never been truer than today about the information that is made available to all of us. Is it true? Is it real? Who's the source? What is their motivation behind why they're saying what they're saying? And then it kind of all circles back to why the NHS is so important, right? So um, the one last remaining equalizing factor in our society is the NHS, right? So we all need our health to be able to lead our lives, contribute to society, work, look after our families, right? And if you get sick or if you have a problem, it's the only system in the world that you can just turn up and you'll get looked after, right? So we have to do our very best to save the NHS, and nobody should ever entertain any conversation around the NHS not existing in the way that it does, okay? Because it doesn't matter whether you have money or you don't have money. If you've got a problem, you can access healthcare, and somebody who's well trained will be able to help you out. So my message would always be, we have to do our very best to save the NHS. But the NHS has problems. Why does it have problems? Those problems arise from a lot of mismanagement, okay? The budget for the NHS is high, okay? I think it's around £150 billion a year, which sounds like a lot of money, but if you were to privatize everything, if all the services that exist in the NHS were privatized, the bill for providing all those services would come to over £1 trillion. Okay, so we are actually providing a brilliant service in this country for just around 10 to 15% of the cost they would cost everybody if we were to try and do this all privately all of the time. Okay, so it's very important, in my opinion, to manage it properly. The problem arises in, how do you spend all that money? Who's in charge of spending the money? Where's it being spent? There's so much waste. Obviously, we've been through a bad period with COVID, and that's really not helped with waiting lists, etc. But the amount of waste I have seen myself, and the lack of motivation, and just generally poor management of a very valuable resource is one of the key problems.
I think you're right. I think, we see the absolute care and expertise of nurses and doctors within the NHS, but it's everything else that surrounds it that causes probably that is the juxtaposition that causes many of the issues.
And also, I can imagine in hospitals, the pressure that the doctors and the nurses are actually feeling, maybe from that mismanagement or their frustration, also can maybe affect, their ability to care properly. Because if you've got so much pressure on yourself, sometimes that may affect the care, which is probably not why they got into the profession in the first place. You see many people wanting to become a doctor or a nurse because ultimately they want to help people and make people's lives better. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, they may be in a system which is incredible, but just needs some tweaks to make it even better.
Liv, you're much wiser than your young years, I have to say, right? So, but yes, that's a really astute comment, right? So caring for people is a very difficult thing to do because it's a selfless act and it comes with a lot of like mental and physical energy that's required to be able to look after somebody else properly. And so, really, nurses, especially nurses, physiotherapists, are the least appreciated people within the whole system, right? And actually, to a large extent, doctors as well. Okay, and so there's been a constant kind of a downward trend in the respect for the medical profession and people that work in healthcare. People are taken for granted, and then once you kind of start to lose um, that appreciation, then people, especially when people aren't getting paid very well. So when you look at nursing staff, for example, they don't get paid very well in the NHS. There's a constant fight between the Royal College of Nursing and the government just to try and get their wages close to the rises in inflation and the real wages, real living wage, etc. And so you're completely right. Why it's very hard for people to stay motivated to want to go in and do this very difficult job, especially when they're not being appreciated as much as they should be. So I agree with you about that.
Absolutely. And I know that they generally will go into this because of an absolute care of human beings, just like teachers who go into the education service go in to want to teach and empower young people, but sometimes the system doesn't doesn't allow the outcomes that we all hoped for. In terms of who you would we've talked about Mrs. Yates from primary school, but with a few questions that we weave through the podcast. Who's been a great and I know you have the mentor in the gentleman who retired last year um, at Salford Hospital. Who else would be a mentor and inspiration to you? I'm sure your family are incredibly proud of you. Anyone else surrounding you that has been a real inspiration?
Yeah. So I would. There are definitely. So no man is an island. Okay. So we all need love and support. Okay, to be able to do the things that we want to do in life. And so my mum is probably the number one in that. She's been my biggest supporter throughout my life. Um, and he was a history teacher, so I didn't study history for A level. But one of the big inspirational forces in my life and one of the big influences was a history teacher at Bolton School. He's retired as well recently. He's also my rugby coach, right? And his name is Casper Joseph, right? So Casper taught history and rugby at Bolton School. And my father passed away when I was at school, when I was 16, and I was playing rugby at the time. And Casper was a real source of strength and support for me at that time in my life where, I was young and vulnerable. And playing rugby really helped me. So, sport, exercise, something to focus on, all of those things. And he actually inspired me to go to Edinburgh University. So if it was for Casper, because I'd never been to Scotland, let alone Edinburgh. And we were just, when I was like 17, applying for university places after one of the rugby training sessions. And I wasn't studying history. So the only contact I had with him was through rugby. And he took me aside and we were just having a chat. And he was saying, so where are you going to apply to study medicine? I hear that's what you want to do. And he went to Edinburgh University himself. And so he suggested it to me, and it wasn't even on my radar. And if he hadn't suggested it to me, I never would have applied. And the story that I'm telling you would have been wildly different. So from Edinburgh University, I've made my best friends. I met my wife there. And so my life story would be entirely different if it wasn't for Casper at school.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to get that message across to young people and older alike, that everybody that you come into contact with might, they just show you another door sometimes, and it takes you on a whole different journey than what you can see yourself or what your certain advisors are giving you in life. And it just go with that opportunity, because you never know where that will lead.
Yeah, I strongly believe that.
Yeah, myself too. What would you go back and tell younger Bilal, Bilal that was at St Andrew's Primary School or at Bolton School, that what you know now with all your wisdom and expertise, and I know you're always pushing to develop and learn more and, learn new things, but what would you go back and tell your younger self?
That's that's quite a tricky question, isn't it? Because when you're young, life is completely new, isn't it? So from when you're a child, everything is new. Every experience that you have is brand new, and so you're just learning and simulating things for the first time. And that's really the beauty of being a kid and being young, because every day or every year that goes by, you're just constantly exposed to new things. Um, I used to read a lot, but I would say read more. Okay, so reading, and especially history, right? So when I was at secondary school, because in my mind I was always like, well, I'm very good at maths and the sciences, so don't really care about the arts, right? And so I would advise my younger self to um, appreciate art and the arts and history, especially more than I did at the time. Because when you're young, your brain's a sponge and you just learn and learn and learn. And I think, and this guy kind of goes back to how do we create a better society, right? So the the way we create rounded people is by learning history about how and why the world is the way it is, right? So my own background and my own personal history, right? So at school, we didn't really learn very much about the British Empire, right? So we learned a lot about the Second World War. We learned about medieval England, King Henry VIII, all of this kind of stuff, and that's all important in its own right. But really, the modern world, the whole of the modern world, is shaped by the British Empire because it's the biggest empire in the history of mankind. Um, and the fact that I live in this country is directly related to that period in history. And so my grandfather, from my dad's side, he left India at the age of 20 in 1920, around 1920, which was still in the days of the British Empire. And he got on a boat or ship to Kenya, or Kenya as it's pronounced. And he left his family at a young age and went all on his own to Kenya, which is a British territory at the time. And he furthered his own education there. He became a surveyor and worked for the British Railways and surveyed quite a large proportion of the railways in Kenya. And so my father was born in Kenya at the time, and then because Kenya was under British rule, he was born as a British citizen, and that is how ultimately we ended up living in this country. And now, when I was growing up, um, in my teens in the 90s, I didn't know any of this. So this is all stuff that I've had to go back and research and read myself. And yeah. So in answer to your question, I mean, what would I do differently? I would probably pay a lot more attention to history. I don't think it's taught very well. I think like there's a lot of information that we are not told about what really happened. And so if we all knew more, then I think there'd be a lot more understanding and tolerance and more understanding and empathy for everybody. And then I guess we would be more united, which is what we actually need, isn't it? So
Because we'd have much deeper understanding about each
yeah,
other.
exactly.
And that's really important. And I agree with you. Reading it's we've got that skill, and it's far better to absorb a book and so many books in the world and so much to listen to, rather than what we've got going on now in technology, which is great and it has a place, but reading a book is going to take you to the next level. And we've both been doing that, haven't we, over Christmas? I've read 5 books over Christmas, which has
Oh,
been
well done. I think if you can find the time to do that, you're winning. You're
yeah,
really winning.
absolutely. I had to come off social media and technology to be able to do it, but but we've
Wow.
managed it.
We haven't even touched on social media. So just quickly before we move on from reading, right? So the act of reading. So um, I've been learning a little bit about consciousness and the development of language in humanity, which appeared about 100,000 years ago. There's a really good author and academic called Professor Noam Chomsky, and I would highly recommend everybody look at his work. He's probably the greatest. He's very old now; he's in his late 90s. Probably the greatest living academic and philosopher of modern times. And his PhD is around how language has developed within humans, right? So the ability to form words in your mind and being able to verbalize those, and then that has gone on to obviously writing, and that has really accelerated human cognition and intelligence and understanding. And so the act of reading is extremely important, and then obviously what you learn from your reading is even more important on top of that.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you. And I know that people listen to recommendations in the podcast because they send us messages and say, we've just read this book or we've looked at this and this was fascinating from this guest. So thank you. It's another little nugget that people get from our episodes as well. What do you wish you'd learned at school and didn't? Is there anything in particular? I mean, I find, Bolton School I know Bolton School because it's not far away from where I live, and I went to West Home, which is in Blackburn, so they were always in competition at netball and swimming, and all the rest. We were the girls' school. Bolton had girls and boys, but separately taught. Um, I was really lucky, as I'm sure you were, that went to a school where there was lots of opportunity in sport, creative arts, all these other things. But generally in ordinary schools today, we've got a real lack of creative arts, and everything's about math, science and English, which is great, but it doesn't form a full holistic human being. But I'm assuming your education was really well rounded and there was lots there. But is there anything that you wished school had taught you and you didn't find out until much later?
Yeah, so you're completely right in everything you just said. Right, so I was quite very fortunate and very lucky to be able to go to an educational institution like Bolton School. I still love that school for everything it gave me and all the opportunities that arisen by going there. And I got a scholarship to go there because we couldn't afford to go. So even that's just another lucky coincidence in life. And the education I got there was very rounded. In the first year, I was in chess club and the literature and debating society. I was in the computer club, and then I played loads of sport. And I did 11 GCSEs. I did 4 A levels, and so from all the things that you need in life to tick all the boxes to keep progressing. So, we can criticize exams and the need for exams, but we do need to measure ourselves in some way, to allow entry into university and to, higher education and everything like that. So I had a pretty rounded education, and I would wish everybody to be able to have an education as rounded and well exposed as I did. But something that's not taught well anywhere, even at Bolton School, are things like how does the world actually work, right? So how does the world work? What is democracy, right? So how do we participate in a functioning democracy? How do we make good decisions? So politics and democracy, which we all have to learn to participate in when we become adults. I think that should be something that everybody's taught. I think learning about finances, personal finances, how do you manage those,
Mm.
right? So I
What's a mortgage?
yeah, what's a mortgage, right? So, what is a loan? What is a mortgage? What's a credit card? What's an APR? What is a student loan? I guess we all find that out, but you can easily, bury your head in the sand, because if you're not familiar with what the implications of all of these financial products have for you in your life, then people can come a cropper, and they generally do until you learn your own lessons, like I did, right? So I think finance and how to handle your own personal finances should be something that everybody should learn. And then other things like nutrition, health and nutrition. So I remember eating a lot of rubbish when I was young, and you have to fight really hard to claw some of that back. So I was very active, but I ate a lot of crap as well at the same time, and I wish I hadn't, right? Because you don't need it. And then a lot of this points back to national government regulation around what should be allowed to be sold to children and what's in it, like the chemicals and preservatives and processed food, etc. I mean, people should be educated to make decisions. Before you put anything in your mouth, you should know exactly what's in it and whether it's good for you or not. So, like just general little things like that. And how to look after yourself better, right? Physically, mentally. These are things that have come to the fore more in recent times. In the 90s, people weren't talking about this kind of stuff. You just did what you did, and it was all fine.
Yeah. And
Um,
luckily, we've got a lot more information now to be able
yeah,
to delve into this. And I think this generation, certainly Liv's generation, are much more aware than I ever was in terms of what they're putting in their mouth. But there's a lot more work to be done for sure. I remember my little niece, she's only 4 years old, and she had these sweets, and she'd, "Oh, look, Auntie Jane, they've got fruit in them." And I was like, "Oh no, but there's a fruit picture on the outside of the packet." And I said, "No, let's have a look at what's really in this food." And we had this big conversation about it. But so there is a lot of education to be done, and it's not done at school. It's generally done by other caregivers.
yeah. Yeah, I think caregivers, parents, we all have responsibility. I've got 3 children, right? And so I've made a point of teaching them these kind of things as they're growing. And, maybe are we allowed to criticize McDonald's or not on this podcast? But I've, actively spoken against that. And I do it all the time. That's drum into their heads that, eating that type of food is not something we should be doing. So that's just one example. There are many, but that's a prime one, isn't it? So, yes, we've got to take responsibility as well for ourselves, right? So taking responsibility for your own actions and, if you're going to have children, then making sure that, the correct amount of time and effort is spent raising your children and teaching them the stuff that they need to know to be good human beings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We always end on the final question, which is a school and memory. But I do just want to say to our listeners, this is an absolute privilege. Bilal has fixed my daughter's knees. She's at the gym. She's doing the flexibility, all the things she should do, and nutrition, her training, her running. And she's A1 now, aren't you? In
A1. And that all wouldn't be possible without, obviously, Mr. Barkatali, who I've got so used to calling Mr. Barkatali that I've forgotten to call him by his first name, but that absolutely wouldn't have been possible.
You can call me Bilal now that you're no longer my patient, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Call him below that, but that's a polite thing in how you've been raised as well.
And that obviously all wouldn't have been possible without your amazing work. And I'm very grateful because last year was, I definitely learned a lot about myself and kind of resilience of learning things like learning to walk again and all these different things and staying on track with physio and all the different things you've got to think about. And now I'm back and my netball team have said even better than I was before, so which is amazing. So thank you so much.
I'm not going to take credit for your netball skills. Not on you.
Do you know, though, that we were in the hospital one day and one of the nurses, I said, "Oh, he's a great surgeon, isn't he?" And he's done great work on the first stop. And she said, "Yes, and he's got a fabulous bedside manner and he's lovely with us too," which was lovely, which was really nice. And I think you should have that feedback because it is beautiful. And I don't think everyone is the same. So thank you for joining us. And I hope that someone that's listened today, you might have some feedback. You may want to follow Mr. Barkatali, Bilal Barkatali on Instagram. I know he does videos, or if you want a specialist knee surgeon or someone within your family needs some advice, we cannot highly recommend this gentleman enough. It's an incredible service, and he's the person to go and see. So we'll put all your contact details in the show notes so people can get in touch with you if they're looking for someone at some point.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. And I just want to say, Liv, that it was a real pleasure actually getting to know you over that time because your knee problems were quite complicated, and you went through some complex surgery to be able to stabilize your patellofemoral joint, your kneecaps. And the fact that you're telling me that back training and playing, that just makes me really happy. And I remember our last consultation where I discharged you completely, so I don't have to see you again in clinic because your treatment with me is complete. And that was quite an emotional moment because I was like, I'm gonna miss seeing you and miss catching up with your updates. So yeah, just stay in touch. I know we're connected on Instagram now, so look forward to seeing updates from you and what you're up to. and I wish you all the best with your life. And I'm sure you're going to do really well because you're really grounded, well-adjusted young person. It's really lovely to have met you. Well done.
Oh, thank you. We really appreciate it.
I
And you,
definitely.
Jane, as well. You're great.
On that last appointment, I left and I was really upset. I said, "Oh, I'm never going to get to see him anymore now. I always look forward to these appointments and they're not going to happen."
Well, that was a good thing. It was a good thing, and you can stay in touch, and I'm sure you'll be interested to know where you end up in a few years' time. So we always finish with a school run memory. What would you like to share with us? Something that may have happened on taking your own children to school or your own school journey.
A school run memory. So I used to get picked up on the school coach, and the school coach was relatively uneventful actually. So did anything funny or fun happen on the coach? My nickname on my school coach was Batman. No idea why, but that was funny. And my memories taking my kids to schools. I've got three, so my middle is called Eva. And when the weather's good and I used to walk her to school, we used to skip all the way to school, which is quite challenging actually. Instead of walking, we'd skip all the way while singing. And so we still sometimes do that, even though she's much bigger now, so we still do it.
It's a privilege, that school run journey. Sometimes parents are so busy because obviously we've all got working lives, and getting them all out of the house with all the stuff they need, the violins and the swimming kit and all that. But actually, it's a really special time, and thank you for sharing your journey in life with us. This is here for people to listen to long into the future, and it's been a real privilege. Thank you so much.
Oh, lovely. Thanks for having me, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the School Run podcast. We absolutely love doing the podcast. Podcasts are free to listen to, but if you'd like to buy us a virtual coffee, we'd be really, really grateful. You just need to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/theschoolrun. That's buymeacoffee.com/theschoolrun. You can also follow us on Instagram at theschoolrun_official or TikTok with the same name at theschoolrun_official. And we always really appreciate your reviews and feedback. On the platform that you're listening to, you can review our podcast and give us a star rating. We'd love to have your comments and receive your feedback. Thank you so much for being a massive support of our journey. This episode has been edited and produced by Mike Roberts from Making Digital Real. We are so lucky and privileged to work with Mike and highly recommend him if you're thinking of starting a podcast.